July 7, 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. At first light, the positions held by the U.S. 27th Infantry Division stirred. In shell-scarred foxholes and narrow trenches, Marines and soldiers ran final checks on their weapons. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, commander of the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, gripped two Colt M1911A1 pistols, each loaded with 7 rounds of .45 ACP, intent on one thing: surviving what would become the largest banzai charge of the Pacific Campaign. At 04:45, the ground shivered and a sound tore through the pre-dawn gloom that veterans would never forget. An anguished, roaring mass as thousands of Japanese troops hurled themselves into the American lines. Imperial Army officers led the assault with gleaming katanas, while ranks behind them surged forward with Arisaka rifles fixed with bayonets. Many officers carried the service pistol of Imperial forces, the Type 14 Nambu, chambered for the 822mm Nambu cartridge. What unfolded that? Morning exposed the sharp contrast between the two nations thinking about personal sidearms and helped explain why American troops relied on what some consider one of the most effective military handguns ever made. The Colt M1911A1 reached the Pacific already, battle-proven from World War I. John Moses, Browning's single-action recoil-operated design, had been the Army's standard since 1911 and fired the .45 ACP, a round developed specifically for stopping power. From the government-issued M1911A1 with its 5-inch barrel, the .45 sent a 230-grain bullet at roughly 830 feet per second. Although the cartridge ran at relatively low chamber pressures, around 21,000 psi, its heavy, slower-moving projectile delivered brutal terminal effects. The bullet's momentum tended to incapacitate or lodge rather than simply pass through, making it especially deadly in close quarters where one well-placed shot could end a threat instantly. By 1944, American industry had produced on the order of 1.88 million M1911A1 pistols for the war, with manufacturing spread among firms such as Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun, Union Switch and Signal, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which turned out several hundred before passing its tooling along. That scale of production left U.S. forces in the Pacific well supplied with reliable sidearms. The Marine Corps adjusted its equipment tables to match island warfare, substantially increasing authorized pistol allocations between 1942 and 1945, a recognition that combat in the Pacific often collapsed into confined, close-in fighting where rifles and crew-served weapons could be impractical. As a result, virtually every Marine officer, many NCOs, tankers, artillerymen, and specialized personnel carried the M1911A1 as their primary personal defense weapon. By contrast, the Japanese Type 14 Nambu represented a very different set of priorities. Introduced in 1926 and named for Kajiro Nambu, it was intended as a more modern, more affordable service pistol. The Type 14 was a striker-fired, semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine and a barrel a little under 5 inches long. Despite the extra round compared with the M1911A1, it was handicapped by basic design and ammunition limitations. The Type 14 used the bottlenecked 822mm Nambu cartridge, pushing roughly a 100-grain bullet at about 1,000 feet per second. Though faster than the .45 ACP, the much lighter projectile produced far less momentum and therefore less immediate stopping effect. The round's unusual dimensions, a roughly 321-inch bullet and a bottlenecked case, meant it shared no commonality with other service cartridges, complicating supply and curbing development of improved ammunition. Japanese practice also influenced who carried what. Officers were expected to buy their own sidearms, and the Type 14 was marketed to be cheaper than earlier Nambu models. At roughly 78 yen, it still represented a significant expense relative to an officer's pay, though it was far less than the earlier Type B at about 180 yen. That economic reality left many Japanese officers in the Pacific equipped with pistols that were, in practical terms, less suitable when facing determined opponents. Field use quickly revealed practical faults. The safety was awkward to operate under stress, effectively requiring 2 hands to disengage, which hindered quick response in close or cramped fighting. The magazine release and feed system was prone to binding in mud and rain, making reloads difficult. There was no slide stop to indicate an empty weapon, so a shooter could not instantly tell whether the pistol was out of rounds. Most critically, the design included a magazine disconnect that prevented firing without a magazine installed. Intended as a safety, this feature could render the pistol useless if the magazine were lost or damaged. By contrast, an M1911A1 could still fire a chambered round, even with the magazine removed. From its adoption in 1926 through 1944, Japan made on the order of 400,000 Type 14 pistols, a respectable total but modest compared with U.S. output. The United States produced several times that number during the war years, a gap that highlighted the enormous difference in industrial capacity between the two nations. The Banzai Assault of July 7, 1944 put those handguns to their sternest test. Major McCarthy of the 27th Infantry Division later likened the Japanese onrush to a stampede from a Western film, only in this case the attackers simply kept coming. The Japanese charge on that July morning had been set in motion by a long night of drinking, where countless bottles of beer and sake were passed among the men as they steeled themselves for what most understood to be their last fight. Many of them approached the dawn already resigned to death, driven by duty and ritual. As the first wave surged forward, Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien stood directly in the path of the attack. The enemy officers, waving polished swords, urged their men onward with wild cries. In response, O'Brien drew both of his Colt M1911A1 pistols, each loaded and ready, and began firing at enemies as they closed in. The results were immediate and devastating. Each heavy .230 grain bullet struck with a force that toppled attackers instantly, the weight and energy of the round slamming into flesh and bone with crushing finality. The pistol's 45 ACP cartridges, designed with stopping power as their sole purpose, showed their value in that desperate moment. O'Brien kept firing until every one of the 14 rounds between his two pistols had been spent. By then, he was already bleeding heavily from a shoulder wound, but refused to surrender or give ground. The colonel trusted his weapons completely. Decades of battlefield use had proven the M1911A1's reliability. It was built with a simple and rugged design that continued to function even when smeared with dirt, clogged with blood, or battered by the confusion of hand-to-hand fighting. Each pull of the trigger brought the expected crack of a bullet leaving the barrel, and O'Brien knew that as long as he had ammunition, his pistol would not fail him. When the last round had been fired and the pistols were empty, he seized a Jeep-mounted .50 caliber machine gun and poured fire into the advancing troops. His fierce defense gave precious minutes for many of his soldiers to withdraw, reorganize, and establish new lines. When the Japanese finally overwhelmed his position, the ground around him bore testimony to his stand. At least 30 enemy soldiers lay dead within sight of his final position. Many of them felled during those first frantic moments when his pistols had spoken with deadly precision. Another story from the same battle illustrates the weapon's role as the last line of defense. Private Tom Baker, cut off and under relentless attack, fought until his rifle ran dry. When no ammunition remained, he swung the rifle as a club, shattering it against the bodies of his attackers. Bleeding and too badly hurt to continue retreating with his comrades, Baker was carefully placed against a tree by fellow soldiers who refused to abandon him. They gave him a cigarette to ease his final moments and placed an M1911A1 in his hand. The pistol had a full magazine with 7 rounds and 1 chambered, 8 chances to strike back. When the battle ended and his body was later found, the pistol lay empty beside him. Around him, in a loose circle, 8 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Every single round had hit its mark. It was a final act of defiance that showed both Baker's determination and the deadly effectiveness of the 45 ACP cartridge when used by a steady hand. Such examples were not rare stories told in isolation. Throughout the Pacific, in thick jungles, on coral beaches, and in the chaotic ruins of captured positions, the M1911A1 proved its worth time and again. At Guadalcanal in 1942, during one tense moment at a division command post, a Japanese officer armed with a sword charged alongside 2 riflemen. The attackers rushed straight toward Admiral Archer Vander, but Marines armed only with their sidearms drew their M1911A1 pistols and opened fire at point-blank range. The heavy .45 rounds smashed into the attackers, halting them in mid-charge. The pistol had once again justified its place as a weapon meant for desperate moments when nothing else stood between life and death. The origins of the .45 ACP cartridge explain why it worked so well in such situations. At the turn of the century, American forces in the Philippines discovered the limits of smaller calibers. Fighting against Moro tribesmen during the Philippine insurrection from 1899 to 1901, soldiers carrying .38 caliber revolvers found that even multiple shots at close range could not stop determined opponents, who would often press their attacks despite mortal wounds. That shocking experience led the U.S. Army to insist on a larger caliber pistol round. The Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904, which used both live animals and cadavers to study bullet performance, confirmed that nothing smaller than .45 caliber would guarantee the stopping power required in close combat. From that decision emerged the .45 ACP, a round heavy and deliberate in flight, but capable of staggering impact. When fired from the M1911A1 with its 5-inch barrel, it did not simply wound an enemy, but often ended the fight immediately regardless of where the bullet struck. This contrasted sharply with lighter rounds that might injure but leave an opponent able to continue fighting. The power of the .45 ACP extended beyond physical effects. Its thunderous report, the visible recoil, and the immediate collapse of those it struck carried psychological weight. Enemies who had already witnessed what the round could do approached battle with new caution. Japanese troops, armed with their weaker Type 14 Nambu pistols and much lighter 8mm rounds, quickly learned to dread the unmistakable sound of M1911A1 fire. The knowledge that a single hit could bring instant death or incapacitation undermined their confidence in their own sidearms and deepened their respect for the American weapon. In the chaos of battle, this psychological advantage mattered nearly as much as the weapon's mechanical qualities, giving American troops not only a tool of survival, but a symbol of reliability and fearsome strength. The low, thunderous report of a .45 ACP was easily distinguishable from the sharper snap of smaller rounds, and opposing troops quickly learned to link that sound with instant lethality. Captured Japanese records made it clear they recognized American firepower advantages. A diary seized from a Japanese officer on Monatal in November 1943 recorded, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear of anybody and everyone is high-spirited," while also acknowledging that their forces were materially outmatched. Individual soldiers shouldered packs weighing around 45 kilograms, about 87% of the average man's 52 kilos body weight, an oppressive burden that, when combined with inadequate weapons and dwindling ammunition, produced a force sustained more by fanatic resolve than by tactical or logistical strength. The Type 14. Nambu, as the standard officer pistol, embodied many of those wider weaknesses. A handgun conceived in peacetime that failed to meet the demands of all-out war. As hostilities dragged on, the contrast with U.S. production became obvious. American manufacture of the M1911A1 kept rigorous standards even under wartime strain, with parts standardized across contractors so components were interchangeable and repairs could be made in the field. Finishes shifted from blued metal to durable parkerizing, and grips moved from checkered walnut to brown plastic to speed output. Yet these economy measures did not erode the pistol's mechanical dependability. Japanese Type 14. Production, by contrast, showed clear decline in quality as resources and factories came under pressure. Late-war pistols from factories such as Toriyamatsu appeared with plain, ungrooved wooden slab grips and generally poorer fit and finish as Allied bombing and material shortages took their toll. Production continued even into the final months. Some Type 14 examples bear dates as late as February 1945, but quantity did not make up for the erosion in workmanship and supply. The ammunition picture was equally revealing. The United States churned out vast quantities of standardized 45 ACP rounds with consistent ballistics and quality control, and it also developed specialized loads for specific needs. Among these were shot-type survival cartridges, M12 T23 variants used in aircrew survival kits, that packed over 100 small pellets. One version contained 118 pieces of number 7 1-2 birdshot wrapped in red waxed paper, so downed flyers could try to procure small game. An improved M15 shot round with 108 pellets and better moisture resistance later replaced the earlier type. Japan, however, struggled to keep adequate stocks of the proprietary 8.8 22mm Nambu ammunition. Its unique dimensions meant captured or improvised rounds could not be used, and submarine and air attacks on supply lines made resupply increasingly rare, leaving many Type 14 pistols hard to keep operational. Training and doctrine amplified these material differences. U.S. personnel received thorough pistol instruction that stressed marksmanship for officers and NCOs, and treated the sidearm as both a primary weapon for some roles and a reliable backup for others. The M1911A1's single-action trigger delivered a crisp, predictable break that supported accuracy, and the heft of an all-steel frame helped tame recoil from the powerful 45 ACP. Japanese preparation emphasized traditional close combat arts, swordsmanship, and bayonet work, which could be effective but demanded closing to contact, a tactic that became increasingly costly against opponents armed with superior firepower. The Type 14 too often served as a symbol of rank rather than a well-practiced battlefield tool, with many officers receiving only minimal instruction in its use. The practical outcome was repeatedly observed across the Pacific. Veterans praise the M1911A1's ability to function where other weapons failed. The pistol operated in the mud of Guadalcanal, the coral grit of Tarawa, the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, and the rain-soaked ground of Okinawa. Its straightforward construction meant that routine field maintenance kept it firing even under the harshest conditions. Accounts of the M1911A1's toughness were passed along throughout Marine and Army formations. Pistols that had been dunked in salt water, buried in grit, or tumbled from aircraft still fired after only rudimentary cleaning. What critics labeled loose tolerances, and which some argued reduced pinpoint accuracy, actually helped the Colt tolerate fouling and foreign matter, a decisive advantage in the Pacific's filthy, wet battlefields. By contrast, the Type 14 Nambu's recurring magazine troubles became infamous. Its tighter internal fits combined with a magazine disconnect safety meant that pistols fouled with sand, mud, or salt water frequently ceased to function. Where an M1911A1 could be stripped and serviced with the simplest tools, the Type 14 demanded more involved maintenance that was hard to carry out under fire. By the end of 1944, as U.S. forces readied for operations against the Japanese home islands, the gap in small arms performance was clear. American units carried M1911A1 pistols honed by 3 years of Pacific combat, with battlefield-driven tweaks, improving handling and dependability while mass production kept quality high. Japanese units, however, suffered from critical shortages of ammunition, spare parts, and even basic weapons. Many late war formations made do with a patchwork of captured arms, obsolete gear, and hastily produced items of falling workmanship. The Type 14, Nambu, despite nearly 2 decades in service, had not been substantially modernized to meet the realities of total war. Okinawa's invasion in April 1945 proved the harshest examination of these differences. In 82 days of savage fighting, American troops met some of the war's most determined resistance, as Japanese defenders, aware that Okinawa was the last major obstacle to the home islands, fought with desperate resolve. U.S. forces suffered over 12,000 killed and about 36,000 wounded in taking the island, while Japanese military deaths numbered roughly 70,000 with civilian losses estimated between 100,000 and 150,000. The superior effectiveness of American small arms was a significant factor in that outcome. Marines and soldiers carrying M1911A1s could confidently confront and stop close-range threats, and captured records and post-war testimony show that Japanese troops developed a deep respect for American firepower, particularly the lethal effects of .45 caliber rounds. The distinctive report of M1911A1 fire became a sound associated with immediate danger, influencing enemy morale and tactical choices. As planners prepared for Operation Downfall, the invasion slated for November 1945, they anticipated intense urban street-to-street fighting that would make reliable sidearms indispensable, and the M1911A's proven performance in tight quarters combat made it central to those plans. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 preempted that invasion, but the M1911A1's reputation was already sealed. A handgun that had served from the trenches of France to the Pacific beaches had demonstrated its value under the most trying conditions. Post-war reviews underscored the industrial gap behind these practical differences. The United States produced nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols during the war years, while Japan's Type 14 output over almost 20 years barely topped 400,000, a roughly 5-to-1 disparity that mirrored broader differences in manufacturing capacity and ultimately helped decide the conflict. The 45 ACP's proven stopping power kept it in use with U.S. Special Operations units long after the M1911A1 ceased to be the service pistol, valued for situations where instantly neutralizing a threat was essential. Ironically, Type 14 Nambu and other Japanese arms became prized war trophies for American servicemen. Their distinctive look and association with enemy officers made them sought-after souvenirs despite their poorer battlefield performance. The gulf between the M1911A1 and the Type 14 Nambu therefore reflected more than opposite design choices. It embodied deeper contrasts in industrial strength, doctrine, and preparedness for modern industrial-scale warfare. The American pistol emerged from a systematic, experience-driven development process supported by vast production resources, while the Type 14, though a step forward from earlier Japanese sidearms, was constrained by a nation that had less industrial depth and fewer resources for prolonged weapons development and testing. The pistol's shortcomings reflected wider Japanese weaknesses, strained logistics, falling manufacturing standards, and a doctrine that prized fighting spirit over technological advantage. For American troops in the Pacific, the M1911A1 offered more than a dependable sidearm. It provided confidence in equipment superiority and the knowledge that a single well-placed .45 could stop an assailant, influenced tactical choices, and steadied morale in life-or-death encounters. Its legacy reaches beyond metal and production counts. The pistol became a symbol of U.S. industrial strength and battlefield professionalism. Stories of men like Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker, preserved in after-action reports and eyewitness accounts, demonstrate how the right weapon in capable hands produced results that raw statistics alone cannot fully convey. The 45 ACP, fired from the M1911A1, halted banzai charges, defeated infiltrators, and served as a reliable last line of defense when other arms failed. In the close quarters fighting that defined much of the Pacific campaign, the combination of heavy projectile and mechanical dependability proved decisive. Despite their courage, Japanese forces were repeatedly outclassed not only in total firepower, but in the practical effectiveness of personal weapons. The Type 14 Nambu, hampered by an underpowered cartridge and design faults that became critical in combat, could not compete with American pistols engineered for maximum battlefield effect. The numbers make the point. A 230-grain bullet moving at 830 feet per second delivers far more momentum and immediate stopping potential than a 100-grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second. And when that ballistic advantage was multiplied across millions of engagements, it translated into tangible tactical dominance that helped shape the war's outcome. The M1911A1's wartime record validated John Moses Browning's original design and the U.S. military's choice of the .45 ACP. Deliberate engineering, testing, and mass production produced a small arm that conferred real battlefield advantages. For Japan, the Type 14's limits illustrated a broader strategic problem, trying to contend with an industrial and technological superpower without the resources for comprehensive military modernization. The pistol's faults were a microcosm of a national situation in which fighting spirit and improvisation had to compensate for material shortfalls. The Pacific War showed repeatedly that in modern conflict, the quality and quantity of equipment could overcome even the most determined resistance. American forces armed with superior weapons like the M1911A1 and backed by vast industrial output gradually wore down Japanese defenses. The effectiveness of the .45 ACP influenced U.S. small arms thinking for decades, even after the M1911A1 was officially replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985. Some special operations units continued to favor .45 caliber pistols for missions demanding maximal stopping power, and lessons about instantly neutralizing threats continued to shape weapons development. The contrast between American and Japanese sidearms therefore tells a larger story about 20th century industrial warfare. Nations capable of designing, producing, and fielding superior equipment in large numbers held decisive advantages. The head-to-head between the M1911A and the Type 14 Nambu illustrates that principle at the level of the individual soldier. The M1911A1's success in the Pacific secured its place in American military history and popular memory. It became shorthand for fighting effectiveness, reliability under pressure, and the triumph of robust engineering over inferior alternatives. Its performance against Type 14 armed foes showed that in matters of life and death, equipment quality could determine outcomes, and the ballistic reality of a 230-grain round at 830 feet per second produced battlefield effects. Japan's 100-grain bullets at 1,000 feet per second could not match, helping to secure Allied victory in the Pacific and cementing the M1911A1 as one of the most effective